It is February 23rd, and today is the first day of the Youth Development Council and Youth Development Division's Strategic Planning Retreat. Today is day 1 of 3. I am so grateful to have you here. Many minds make great plans, and we are together going to work to put our energy and insight and passion and perspective together into something that really helps shape the Youth Development Council and the Youth Development Division for years to come. I am Celeste Jansen. I have had the privilege of being the chair of the YDC in recent years. And today, as we call to order, I'd like to begin with a land acknowledgement. So I'm going to pull it up on my screen and share with you all that I'd like to acknowledge the many tribes and bands who call Oregon their ancestral territory and honor the ongoing relationship between the land, plants, animals, and people indigenous to this place we call home. We recognize the continued sovereignty of the 9 federally recognized tribes who have ties to this place and the subsequent bands within those tribes, and thank them for continuing to teach us how we might all be here together. Today we're going to begin with a roll call of staff, and then after that we will start by inviting everyone to participate in a welcoming activity. So Melissa, if you are ready, we will go ahead and begin today now with a roll call.
Great, thank you, Celeste. Melissa Gallardo. I am staff with the Youth Development Division and I'm the Council Administrator for the Youth Development Council. I'm just going to go alphabetically through the council, and we will also call roll for the staff. Pamela Abernathy.
Here.
Excellent. Janet Ahrens.
Here.
Jaime Arredondo.
Here.
Zan Ojero. Aishatu Berry. Eric Cardella.
Here.
Parasa Chanrami. I think Parasa is joining us later. Janine Hartley.
Here.
Alicia Haynes.
Here.
And Celeste Jansen.
Here.
Andy Leonard. I saw Andy, he might be muted. I'm going to note that. Thank you, Andy.
Can you hear me?
Yep. Tabidi Lewis.
Here.
Adrian Livingston.
Here.
Christina McMahon.
Here.
Maricela Ortega Guzman.
Here.
Destiny Ortiz. Jeff Parker. Molly Rogers. Oh, it looks like we were frozen for a minute. Is everybody back?
Yep.
Okay, let's try. I'm going to go back to Destiny Ortiz. Jeff Parker.
Here. I hope I didn't freeze us.
Molly Rogers.
I'm here, thanks.
Thank you. Diana Rojas.
Here.
Great. Karen Spencer.
Here.
John Teague.
Right here.
Liz Thorne. Koi Vu. And let's see if we have any of our ex officio members. Nakia Daniels. I think I just admitted Sam Coe. Sam, are you here?
Sam is here.
Thank you. And on to YDD staff, Cord Bucher.
I am here.
Molly Burns.
Here.
Brian Detman.
Here. And
Bill Hansel.
present.
Bill is here. Abraham Magana.
Here.
Sanji Moore,
Good afternoon. I'm present.
Lindsay Schoonover,
Sorry, I was having trouble with my cursor and the mute button. I am here.
Anya Sakino,
Here.
Paul Sell,
Here.
Ryan Shands,
Here.
and Jared Shaw.
Here.
That is everyone. Thank you so much for your enthusiastic responses. And we may have people coming and going throughout the meeting, but official roll call is done. Thank you.
Thanks, Melissa. I think I'm up next. My son decided to start playing his bass guitar right at this very moment, so we may hear that in the background. Yep, there it goes.
He's better than I am, so you're lucky.
I think he's playing a Green Day song. So, Cord, thumbs up from Cord. So I am just excited that you all are here, and I know that we're not in person, and that definitely has its downsides. I haven't met many of you in any other way than virtually. Jaime says background music is a must. So okay. So it's a good song. This is a good start. Having some background. Of course, I've like sent him a couple texts like not now, so it's probably going to end. But we can, dial him up. Does he need a drummer? Eric says he actually also plays drums. So if that sometimes happens right outside the door, that would even be more distracting than the bass. But nonetheless, welcome. I'm going to run us through the just a quick overview and agenda for today, and maybe briefly tomorrow, and then want to get to this activity, which, again, virtually, sometimes these things can feel challenging, but I'm just excited that we have a little, we wanted to dedicate time to building some relationship. 30 minutes may not seem like a lot. It may seem like a lot to others, but again, it's important to me that we do spend some time in building some kind of relationship in this virtual environment. So we do have this activity that Karen will talk about in a minute. I think, actually, no, I think it's Karen's time. I think I'm just should close my mouth and turn it.
Honing in on my time, Brian. Luckily, we're not like news anchors or something on the nightly news, right?
You're gonna give me the elbow. Give me the hook. Go, Melissa.
That's okay. Right. So we are going to do a warm-up relationship building activity. It helps us to get into the space as well. So here is what's going to happen. We are going to go into breakout rooms as council members, and then guests, there'll be a separate room for you, and you are welcome to engage as well. When you are in the breakout room, you are going to have 2 questions to answer. The first one is, if you could be any superhero, what would you be? And you can think about your childhood, whatever superhero you wanted to be, doesn't matter. And then think about, in reality, what is the superpower that you are bringing to the work with the YDC? So what is the superpower that you're bringing? And in your small group, you're going to talk about that, and what you will do when we come back as a main group is you each will introduce somebody else. We ask that you keep it to 1 or 2 words, 3 or 4 at most, but really 1 or 2 words, because it's a lot of people. We've got a lot to do. It should be a lot of fun. I can't wait to hear particularly what John Teague's superhero would be, because I already think he's a superhero, so we'll have to find out what it is. So you'll have 8 or so minutes to do this. We will give you a warning of about a minute. Melissa, are you ready to divide folks up?
I am so close. Give me just 1 more minute.
Okay, good. So I want to ask if anybody has any questions. So when you get into your breakout room, you will answer the 2 questions, decide on who's going to introduce which person, and then we'll come back and then we will do the introductions, and we will be keeping track of at least your in realities. I want to make sure that we track that.
All right, thanks. I think I'm ready to launch the breakout rooms. We'll give it a shot.
Okay, thank you, Melissa.
Thank you. Looking to see who is not in a breakout room. Celeste, Heidi. Oh, it's making it. Hi, Heidi. Let's see here.
Melissa, are you moving all of us into a breakout room, or are we sitting tight here?
Let me try to put you in one. Thank you, Heidi.
Yeah, I think I'm not going into 1, 2, as we had talked about.
Right. It looks like, I mean, our guests are hanging out here with me, and Tabidi just rejoined, so I'm going to see if I can reassign him.
Okay.
I don't know why, I'm not sure why Celeste is not in one, because I put her in one. So I'm just looking to see.
I know it's a little tricky.
Yeah, how that's working. So maybe, let's see here. Move to breakout room. Let me see if I can move in here. Hmm. Hi, Tabiti. Did you rejoin us? Are you there? Hi, Alicia. Were you in a breakout room and did you get bumped out? Oh, I'm sorry. You're muted. I can't hear you. Huh. It doesn't look like you're muted, but I still can't hear you, Alicia.
There we go.
Oh, I can hear you. Hello.
Yeah, sorry about that. So I was in breakout room 3.
Do you want me to try to send you back to breakout room 3 for the last couple minutes?
No, I don't know. You tell me. You guys are running this thing.
let me try to have you rejoin your group. Thank you for
All
your
right, thanks.
Uh-huh.
Well, that was really fun. I hope that you had great conversations and got to know each other a little bit better. I am going to go first with introducing Molly Burns. Persistence is both her superhero that she wanted to be and the superpower that she brings. So the word is persistence.
I will introduce Karen Spencer, and following the rules, the two words are storm and planning.
Melissa, from here, it might be helpful if you names a name and the two pairs can go, and then the next pair, it might make it fastest.
All right, you'll have
rather
to
than
help me out a little
popcorning.
bit. But okay, great. Let's see. Pamela Abernathy. Looks like you are muted, Pamela.
Yes, I'd love to introduce Molly, who does such great work heading up our Juvenile Justice Subcommittee. And the two words about her, which I've seen in action at many a meeting, are she brings lots of energy and a real sense of what could we do better.
And that's Molly Rogers, right? Molly, where are you? There you are.
Right here. And I get the opportunity, we were a trio, to introduce Lindsay. Her is modesty and a servant student for leadership, is her words.
All right, Lindsay, your turn. Are you ready?
Yeah. I am introducing Pamela Abernathy. Her words would be Superman, and I would say creation and persistence for her 3 words.
Excellent, thank you. Janet Ahrens, can you go next?
Yes, I have to take my glasses down to find the little buttons. So I get to introduce Jaime, and his superpower in his real life, as well as an opportunity for the YDC to capture, would be storytelling. And he has a very brief, powerful story. And I wondered if maybe we've got like, it's like 2 minutes. Is that too long to read it or to speak it?
Probably too long at this time. I have to be the...
Let's try to come back to it. Yeah.
That would be great. You guys would really appreciate it. This is marvelous, truly marvelous.
This will be the cliffhanger for the folks who stay till the end of the meeting.
All right, Jaime, let's hear what you have you introduced Janet to us.
Thank you, Janet, for the introduction. She would be Batwoman, a person that was wealthy, a Jewish lesbian, and the power that she brings into the YDCs is her growing tool belt and the YDC is growing too, Bill. Jan and I have been on the YDC since the beginning.
I love it. Thank you. Eric Cardella, can you go next?
I can. I had Bill, and in case you all don't know, Bill is Batman. There was a little bit of a back and forth about which superhero Bill would be, but Batman is the one that resonated with me when he shared that. And along with that, the one word that stood out was really resourceful that I picked up. I was joking with Bill that he can take a spreadsheet or a data tool and turn it into a life-saving device for many of the programs out there. So Bill is the resourceful Batman of the Youth Development Division.
I love it. Bill, you're up. Bill Hansel.
All right. I am introducing Paul Sell and as Superman. And in the two things that words that come to mind would be that kind of all-encompassing ability, that's across, just can take on anything, and is very hard to slow down.
Thanks, Bill. Paul, can you go?
I have Alicia Haynes, and her two words are interesting to me because I can relate with them very well. The superhero is underdog, and it's because of showing up and being committed to the work.
Perfect. Thank you. Alicia, let's hear from you.
Great. I have Eric Cardella, Superman, because he brings it all, and Eric brings strategic thinking to the work.
Nice. I love it. Janine Hartley, can you go next?
You bet. We were a trio too, so I'll introduce Chief John Teague, who is, I'll let you draw the parallels here, but Yosemite Sam, because he has the power to endure hairy moments.
I love it. All right, Chief Teague, you are up.
I'll throw it back at Janine, who is Connector. And if you don't remember that superhero, you weren't paying attention in the 70s, who brings an awesome ability to organize and pull things together. And Ryan Shands, you're up.
Yeah, well, I don't have anybody else to talk about, though, except for myself, because I was the third person in the group.
Oh, gosh, you're right.
So it's okay, I guess, right? I'm not breaking any rules, I don't think. So there wasn't really a superhero that's like good at kind of balancing things out, I guess. And so we talked about Wolverine a little bit because he was like kind of a childhood hero of mine, but I just thought like he would be a terrible team player. And so I was trying to think of somebody who would be a better team player. And so anyways, that's the best example I had right there. So anyway. Oh, and because of de-escalating, slicing through the problem, de-escalating the situation. So
perfect. Was that everyone in your group?
Yeah, that was it.
Thank you. Okay, thanks. Let's see. Andy Leonard.
I would introduce Adrian Livings, and she was like Supergirl, and only because her superpowers would be super speed and super stamina, and what they do is fighting for justice and shedding light on victims.
Excellent. Thank you. Adrian.
Okay, I will introduce Abraham Magana, and we both shared a desire of speed, and so one of the superheroes was Flash, but then with everything, collaboration and just bringing everyone together in the process.
And I can introduce Andy. Andy, a superhero, he said Batman because when he's Batman, he goes out to do what needs to get done. But he can still have, back when he's done doing that, he's Bruce Wayne, back to living the normal life, I guess, as you can, right? But another thing he mentioned in his work was this idea of being, the way he phrased it was in the invisible, is the way he said it, right? Because when he works with youth, oftentimes the youth tell him what they want to, basically tell him what he wants to hear. But what he wants to be able to do is hear what they don't tell him, or see what they don't tell him is what he really wants to know.
That is a good one. All right. Christina McMahon, did you already go or can you go?
No, I did not go. I will go and I will share about Anya Sakino. Anya shared with us that she doesn't really believe in superheroes, but she had an observation that a lot of superheroes seem to have a really difficult childhood story, often having suffered a lot of trauma. And she said that her power is her, I'm paraphrasing Anya, so if I got this wrong, let me know, belief in resiliency of our young people and their ability to persevere.
Thank you. Anya, can you take your turn?
Well, of course. Well, Christina's described me in a much nicer terms than I was describing myself. So thank you, Christina. Well, Christina is and was and always will be a Wonder Woman. And the strengths that she shares with Wonder Woman, and they can go in a competition about that, I'm sure, is the strengths and pursuit of truth and what is just in the world. So pleasure to have met you, Miss Christina McMahon.
Thank you. Maricela, can you go next?
I'd like to introduce Miss Sanji Moore. She listed some attributes that were consistent with Dr. Strange. And the two words I'd like to give are boldness and detail-oriented.
Great, thank you, Maricela. Sanji.
Good afternoon again. And that was Karen's observation because I didn't know that the attributes I listed were Dr. Strange, but some of those were to be invisible and to give people the grace to have the opportunity to do over in their choice, to allow them to see the path that a choice could make for them moving into the future. And so in introducing Maricela Ortega Guzman, Maricela is not necessarily able to relate to superheroes, but she does love X-Men, and Wolverine is her favorite. So she picked Wolverine, and because of her tenacity and ability to overcome obstacles, she stated that she was able to do that because she is goal-oriented and self-motivated.
Awesome, thank you. Jeff Parker.
Yeah, thanks. Well, our group got to see the trailer for the real-life action thriller called Community Wonder Woman, which is a real-time, real-life expose of Diana Rojas, who fights for social justice using her authenticity, her expertise, and just by representing.
Oh my goodness, I cannot wait to see that trailer. Thank you.
It's awesome.
Diana, can you go next?
That was very, very kind, Jeff. Thanks. I'm a little shy now. I am going to introduce Brian. And I'm very sorry, Brian, but I don't remember the name. It was in a comic book, and it was one of the few, if not the only, Black character or superhero. I have not heard of him, so it might be before my time. Sorry, Brian, again. And the word was empathetic.
Thank you, Diana. You're up, Brian.
I know. I think it was Hawkeye, but like I'm like was I just imagining something that I was reading a comic? But anyway, I'm introducing Jared Shaw, who's somewhere on the screen. Jared is, and he didn't use this word, but I'm summarizing humanitarian, and is somebody who has throughout his work and life been connected with different causes to support populations that are kind of on the outside. And the other word I would use for Jared is, and it's more than one word, but he has worked at nonprofits, so he brings direct experience of our grantees to his work. Jared.
Okay, great. And I'm introducing Jeff Parker.
And Jeff is a listener, a systems thinker, and is adaptable and wants to be kind of making movement on important issues, and also Aquaman.
Excellent, thank you. I'm looking at my list and we're getting down there, so I want to make sure I didn't miss anyone. Sam, did you go? Sam Coe? Can't hear. Oh, there we go.
Yep, sorry. I don't know. I don't think so. And then my partner was Cord, and I forgot. I'm so sorry. I forgot what Cord said. He was taking notes for us. I'm so sorry, Cord.
Cord, can you fill us in?
Yeah, I took an online quiz and it said I was Spider-Man. I'm not really a big superhero person, but I think if I had some powers, it would be semi-X-ray vision for problems, finding things that others might not see, and trying to maintain levity in challenging situations. And my partner was Sam. Sam didn't have a superhero, but told us about his superpower. I think he needs a superhero name though, so I will call him the Datanator, who shreds assumptions by asking where is the data, and ensuring that in any sort of conversation that we get to the root of the problem by asking that question, which I think is a great power. So
that is a great power. Thank you, Cord. I think that's everyone. If I missed anyone, can you please speak up now? I think
I wasn't able to be in the group, so
great. Tabidi,
I just don't want you to think I wasn't trying to participate.
Thanks, Tabidi.
I didn't either. My son is taking his MAPS testing and we had low bandwidth, so I hopped off, so I apologize to everyone. I had a stressed out fourth grader over here.
I also
and so I couldn't either. I arrived to the call late, so I'm very sorry. The meetings say that they're going to be an hour, but then, you know, just the 5 minutes extra at the very end. So, I mean, everybody can relate with that. So, yeah, sorry, but I'm present. I'm here. I'm listening to everybody's great superpowers. So,
thank you. I think with that, Karen. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I wasn't able to be in a group either, but I'm here. I'm taking the information in and listening and enjoying being here.
Thank you. Karen, do you need to wrap it up, or are we going to Brian next?
I'm now turning it over to Brian like a really good newscaster.
And here I am with the weather. So thanks, everybody. Thanks for that. And just wanted to spend a little time at the beginning of our retreat on that. I'm going to not spend much time chatting. I'm going to share my screen. We have one of our speakers coming up here in a few minutes. Maybe actually, wait, first, Melissa, could you pull up the day one agenda or sort of the annotated piece so that I can just in 2 or 3 minutes try to go through what we've got over the next few days?
So you want the annotated or the?
No, sorry, not the annotated. I meant just the more generic one.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
You see it?
Thank you. So you guys, so we've done our introductory activity. I'm going to, here in a second, I'll share overview meeting goals and a little bit about our kind of the strategic priorities. We're going to hear from our guest speaker, and I saw that Juliette had logged in. Juliette Mackin from NPC Research is going to talk about risk and protective factors. Sit back, listen. If you want your camera on or off, you can decide, but I'm excited to have her talk about some of the important work that supports our juvenile justice work. And so for those who are on the juvenile justice subcommittee or in the juvenile justice field, this I think will be pretty familiar information, but I think for others who are not as connected to that juvenile justice work, this is really important to understand the role of protective factors and risk factors and how our grantees are working to advance, use those tools to advance their work. We'll have a little break at 2:45, and then we'll jump into another guest presenter, Grace Bullock, who's with the Oregon Department of Education. She will talk about the integrated model of mental health. And so I think it's just a really helpful framework for our work, aligns really beautifully with positive youth development, and is, as these models come out, and whether it's positive youth development or positive human behavior or positive human development, they kind of go by different names, I think, and each time I feel like there's like some new elements or pieces. So Grace is going to talk about that. We're going to begin. I'll just, Melissa, if you can throw up day 2, that would be great. Tomorrow, we begin tomorrow morning early, or well, it's not an afternoon start, it's a morning start. So please keep that in mind. We log on a few minutes before 9. We want to get started right at 9. We'll do the roll call and call to order and all of that. We'll do a reflection for 15 or so minutes. So we're going to end today with a presentation. We'll have a quick public comment and then be done. But be thinking overnight about the presentations that you were able to listen in on, and just any questions or thoughts. We'll do again a pretty quick reflection exercise, but have more time tomorrow afternoon to spend time in some breakout rooms identifying kind of themes and actions that have come out of the information you will have heard. And then following our reflection in the morning, we'll have our staff 4 different presentations, which you've been asked to rank in some kind of order. Hopefully you've gotten that information to Melissa for those council members, so that we can get you into those breakouts. We'll do our best to get you in your first 2 choices, but depending on, we want to have more or less an even number of people in those, so you might get your 3rd choice. It's very possible, but that's again an opportunity for our staff to kind of share kind of some high-level information, something provocative, something that a new idea or a highlight, and then have a little conversation. And then so that will happen. Actually, there'll be 2 rounds of that, so you get to hear a couple of presentations. We'll spend a little time later in the morning with and as a full group talking about our RFA strategy, which I think is just important because we're about to roll out our RFA, meaning request for applications. So that's coming up. Then again, we'll spend some time late morning on themes and actions, public comment at the end. So if you could jump to day 3, thank you, Melissa. Quick call to order, roll call. Day 3 is in the afternoon, so make sure you've got your, mark your calendar. You can do your regular work in the morning. And then we'll be back online at 1 o'clock Thursday afternoon. And there we'll spend time making sense, making meaning of all that we've heard, and working in some breakout sessions, which we'll describe to you when the time is right. We've named them by different fruit, apple, pear, grape, lemon, and one other, Melissa, peach and peach. So you will be put into different fruit groups, and that will be, I think, fun. We'll work to kind of prioritize some of the information that we've heard, share a bit about next steps, and then we'll be done. So that's the quick overview of what is going to happen. For guests who are logged in and not either staff or members of the council, we will make space at the end for public comment. There's a limit of 3 minutes per person. And if you have questions or want to introduce yourself if you're coming in late, please use the chat. We'll do our best to get to those questions or comments from guests who are, again, not council members or staff. So that's the quick overview. Any questions about the agenda? I'm not seeing any. Melissa or somebody, if there's a hand up, somebody say it, because I can't see every person's screen.
I don't see anything in the chat. I see some thumbs up and some sounds good.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah.
Real fast, just want to ground us in our work we went over the agenda, done. So you've seen this information at recent meetings. Just wanted to remind us why, really at the core, why we're here. Our mission is to align systems and leverage community partnerships to ensure integrated, measurable, and accountable services for youth ages 6 through 24. The programs we fund support educational and career success, focus on crime prevention, and reduce high-risk behaviors. Our vision, that all youth have the opportunity to thrive and achieve their full potential. Our values, equitable access, equal opportunity, youth-centered approaches and results, as well as inclusion and innovation. And our beliefs, we believe all youth should have equitable access to support, services, and opportunities. We believe in anti-racism. We believe all youth should be supported without either replacing or usurping family roles. And we believe in identifying innovative avenues for youth success. Just want to remind you of our proposed priorities. We're going to spend more time on this, more probably in day 3, but just wanted to remind folks, based on the input over the last couple of months, we've identified these 5 overarching priorities. I think in some of the committees, you've had a little time to, or subcommittees, some time to reflect on these. We will be trying to organize the information that we're gathering over the next few days into strategies and actions or activities that fall within these 5 different priority areas. So priority 1, identify systemic problems, advance solutions, and support structural reforms. I've heard in some committee meetings lately, great ideas about organizing a youth forum, and that to me would be a great way to identify issues, but also advance solutions. Number 2, promote policies and partnerships that expand and leverage resources. I think that the partnerships that we're starting to form with other agencies, with community-based partners in re-engagement, those are all critical partnerships for our work. Achieve strategic outcomes through grant making and programs that support youth-centered pathways and practices and affirm identity and safety. Our grant managers will talk about the RFA and some adjustments, refinements, and improvements they're making to the RFA, the request for application process. So I think that fits nicely as an example of something that we're pursuing within priority 3. Strengthen YDC, YDD communication and awareness capacity to achieve our priorities, goals, and outcomes. We need to share more about the work we're doing. I've been meeting with legislators, talking about our critical work. We're going to prioritize creating a position focused on policy and communication. So that's an example there. And then an internal priority, which I don't mind making public, just recognize, continue to strengthen YDD, YDC cohesion and inclusion. I think this retreat, though again, we're not in person, is a great example of our working to really all be on the same page. I'm going to stop there because we want to get to our speaker. I was going to share some information on kind of our theory of action. I will bring that up at a later time. I think it makes more sense for us to move forward. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I don't know exactly how to do that. Stop share, that would probably be a good idea. So I'm going to stop there. Melissa, what's next? Do we have a quick break and then we have our speaker, or do we have our speaker?
We have our speaker. So we have
Okay.
Juliette Mackin all queued up and ready to go.
All right, I'm going to turn it over. Juliette Mackin is somewhere. There she is. I see her on the screen. Hello, Juliette. Rather than me blathering on, I'm going to turn it over to you. If you please don't mind introducing yourself in a little more specificity than I did a few minutes ago. We just appreciate your taking the time to be with us, your work with the YDD and YDC over the years, and we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Melissa, were you going to put the slides up?
Yes, I can. You ready for that?
I am. So hi, everybody. I know some of you I've worked with over the years, and many of you who are in the juvenile side, juvenile justice side, will know these slides or be able to do this presentation along with me. Feel free to jump in if there's anything that I have missed. But my purpose today is really to cover some information about the juvenile crime prevention, what we call Jcp Assessment, which is an assessment tool that we use in Oregon to help us identify those youth who are at risk for delinquency. And so the purpose for me this session is really to give you an overarching view of what that tool is, why we use it, and how it might be useful as a context for how the juvenile crime prevention side of YDD helps inform some work that you may be doing as an agency overall or as a council, and thinking about the way that we structure both the youth level information as well as how that information can be used more broadly for planning and for evaluation. So next slide, please. Thank you. So I work at NPC Research, and we're a small evaluation and research company. We do training and technical support as well. And I've worked on the JCP related tools and services, planning and evaluation since 1998. We started helping the Oregon Juvenile Department Directors Association with some work that they were doing, compiling information and planning for an assessment tool that could be used statewide for people working with youth, both youth in community as well as youth in the juvenile justice system. And we have been working on developing, testing, validating, and using the Jcp assessment since then. The evaluation of the Jcp initiative started in 2001. So we've been working on this for quite a while now. And next slide, please. So we'll talk in this presentation about the theoretical foundation of the Jcp assessment, the overview of the tool and how we use it. And I thought I would just mention up front that this tool is validated, and what that means is that we are trying to predict which youth are likely to come into the juvenile justice system or continue their involvement. It's validated to indicate whether or not a youth will have a criminal referral within the following 12 months of the time of the assessment. And we're using the tool now in Oregon at juvenile departments, in tribal prevention programs, in a wide-ranging set of youth-serving programs, from after-school programs, treatment programs, mental health and substance use programs, family interventions, traditional tribal activities. So lots of different types of programs using this same approach so that there can be conversation and some consistency around how we look at risk for juvenile justice involvement. I thought I'd mention also that because Oregon had done this work a while ago, there's been a lot of interest, and we've actually trained people in other tribes outside of Oregon, in other states and community programs who use this model because of the structure being fairly simple to use. So it is used outside of our state as well. Next slide, please. So the Jcp assessment is based on decades of research that were informing the science of risk and protective factors. So risk and protective factors that predict specifically juvenile justice involvement. And there are really three different mechanisms that we're looking at. The Jcp was designed to be objective, intuitive, and equitable. Objective because it was intended to be based primarily on characteristics that were observable to help us avoid the problems that we'd run into in the past with agencies and individuals and communities identifying youth without having the science behind that, and that creates a lot of subjective decision making. So we were really trying to get to a place where there was consistency and objective decision making. It was intuitive, or intended to be intuitive, so that those items on the assessment would be easy to use, that could be spread across the field of juvenile services, that people could use it without a lot of training, that the items would make sense to average people, and then it would be equitable, that it's valid across all different groups of youth. So it's been validated regardless of race, gender, age of the young person. These items work to help us understand the relationship between these characteristics and what's going on for youth and their level of risk for juvenile crime. The tool was developed through partnerships with lots of people in this state, researchers, practitioners, people who are providing services to youth, people in juvenile courts, both managers and supervisors, as well as direct service staff. We had school staff helping us. We were trying to create a common language across all of these different systems and help people identify and understand who to work with to focus on that risk of juvenile justice involvement. So we were trying to make sure that there was a way that people could understand each other, regardless of the kind of background and training that they had. Next slide, please. So we use the Jcp assessment to identify which youth we should be intervening with, help match them to the appropriate services, and particularly the level of intensity of those services, and then to monitor their progress over time. So the Jcp assessment is both an initial look at how things are going, but it's also used over time at various reassessment points to see what has changed, what has emerged, and is there anything that's going to inform us about the impact of the interventions and services that we've provided. It is a youth level tool, but we use it both at the individual youth level to help understand specific things that are happening with that child, but also in combination across youth to look at community level needs, to try to evaluate specific programs, and to be able to see at different community levels. We compile the data to see what kinds of service gaps we have, where the needs are emerging, and are those changing over time? Do we see trends of different risks or lack of protective factors kind of emerging for specific communities? The tool really helps us, with part of that intention was to have a way to feel confident when we're making decisions, particularly when we're looking at limited resources, to identify the right youth and the right services, that people could feel confident communicating with each other, and that when they look at someone having completed this assessment, when they look at those results, they understand what they need and they can feel confident in the decision making. Oregon has also been undergoing for quite a few years many efforts to improve the systems, make them more equitable, and use research to help inform decision making. So that evidence-based decision making is an important process that Oregon's been going through, and assessment or validated assessment is a part of that process. Next slide, Lisa. So this is just a list of many of the different areas that we've been talking about. I wanted to mention too that one of the things that tools like this provide is a way to triage, to help us identify who should be at what level of service, and to be as accurate as possible, particularly because there have always been concerns about labeling youth or having certain labels stick with them. So we want to make sure that we're focusing both on challenges but also on strengths, and helping to make sure that we aren't labeling people without providing the associated supports that are really necessary. One of the other pieces about this type of an assessment is to try to identify early what those needs are and intervene so that we could potentially prevent other challenges from happening later. And I'll talk a little bit about that cumulative or progressive assessment, or the progressive impact of kind of the addition of different risk factors. Next slide, please. So we know that just like we see risk factors for different health conditions like heart attacks or diabetes, we know those risk factors make things more likely for us to experience some of those negative medical outcomes. Risk factors for delinquency are the same idea. They increase the chance that we'll have a situation with the youth getting in trouble. So we also know that we can prevent or mitigate negative outcomes by creating scenarios or creating situations where we have protective factors or other strengths. There are decisions, there are circumstances that can prevent these negative things from happening. We know that we can change the trajectory that youth are on if they're showing signs of difficulty by noticing those signs, especially in some kind of systematic way, by intervening in a specific way, we're focusing on reducing risk factors and increasing protective factors. So the model that we're looking at is trying to integrate these different elements. Other key strategies are really important too. So using a strength-based approach in how we engage with youth and families, being aware of trauma and utilizing trauma-competent services and approaches, being culturally responsive, offering culturally specific services. So all of these pieces are really important to integrate. This assessment isn't the only piece, but it helps to tie some of these other elements together. The other piece that the assessment helps with is that monitoring factor. So helping to look over time at what has changed. When we make an assessment, provide specific intervention and service, we can then check to see how effective has that approach been. Are we able to reduce some of those risk factors? Are we able to increase protective factors? And what new issues may have emerged so that we can be current around what's happening and what's good to be, what are the important things to change. It's important to know that in the Jcp assessment tool, there are some factors, some risk factors that are dynamic, so they are changeable, and those are the ones that we measure over time to see what impact are we seeing. There also are risk factors for delinquency that are static, so once a youth has them, they are part of their history, and it's important to know those, but it is something to pay attention to, that there are those historical factors as well as the changeable ones. We also like to emphasize the piece around the protective factors because sometimes it's easier in our interventions to think about how do we build on those positives, build on the strong foundations, and help create new opportunities and avenues rather than always focus on taking away some of the negative pieces. So helping to involve youth in positive activities, connect them to positive peer groups, connect them to positive, strong adults who could be mentors and supports for them. All of those aspects that really help create that trajectory that we're looking for. Next slide. So this is a slide that just covers the model again that the Jcp is based on, the principles of effective intervention, which are around risk and need and treatment. And the focus on criminogenic risk and need factors means those things that connect to juvenile crime. What are those risk and need factors? We know lots of things are happening with youth, but for this particular tool, our focus was on how do we identify those things that are going on that might lead them to be involved in crime. We also want to be able to use, as I mentioned, the science-based, behavioral-based interventions in terms of our services and treatments. Next slide. So this model really shows where the assessment fits in terms of a broader pathway of gathering information. So the assessment of risk and need and protective factors on the left. The Jcp assessment is not a comprehensive biopsychosocial assessment tool. It is a risk for juvenile crime involvement tool, but it does lead to, it helps us flag where additional screening and assessment might be needed. So this model just shows that Jcp can also give us information about whether we need more screening and assessment related to mental health issues, drug and alcohol issues, school-related issues. So any of those other pieces or other domains that might be important. And then, of course, leading into that comprehensive service plan and program evaluation. Next slide. So related to the evaluation, so the evaluation of the Juvenile Crime Prevention Initiative helps to look at high-level outcomes as well as intermediate outcomes. And we've been talking about reducing risks, increasing protective factors. Those are our intermediate outcomes. This is a way that we've been able to, or the Youth Development Division has been able to fund services and programs across all different communities in Oregon, in juvenile justice, in schools, in tribes, to be able to have all kinds of individualized specific services, but that we have all of the same kind of goals, that we're moving in the same direction around reducing this, looking at this high level outcome, reducing juvenile crime. So being able to think through at the agency and council level for you to think about the other areas that you're focused on in terms of youth support, positive youth development, and other youth services, is are there ways, even if we really individualize services specific to our different communities, what is it that ties them together, and are there ways to think about gathering some common measurements around some of these other outcomes? So, for example, are there ways to look at how youth are connecting in to positive peers, how they are able to find meaningful work or train for meaningful work, how can they be productive contributors to the community? So there's different ways to think about them at the broader level. Next slide, please. So these are some areas based on some of the other work that all of you are doing around focusing on educational attainment, housing stability, employment readiness, other crime prevention, and gang prevention. What are some of those things that you could be measuring and looking at across all of the different programs and services that are funded? So with educational attainment, for example, you could look at school engagement, or ways that you're keeping young people attending school or preventing truancy, helping them graduate, helping them complete GEDs, connecting to alternative educational programs like technical or vocational education. So there may be lots of different ways that programs are trying to impact these outcomes, but there may be ways to consider how you measure them in a common way. Next slide, please. So we're going to talk a little bit about the content of the Jcp tool, just to give an example of what this particular assessment looks like. Next slide. So the Jcp is structured by 6 different life domains: school issues, peer relationships, behavior issues, family functioning, substance use, and attitudes, values, and beliefs. And within each of these domains, there are indicators, the risk and protective factors that are specific within each of these areas. And again, all of these were, the idea with the items is that they are helping to explain more specifically, what does it mean to have a risk in the peer relationships domain or in family functioning? And so it gives us some more specific information. We have 30 items on the tool that are scored as part of our scored risk assessment, and over 50 that help us gather information about these areas for case planning. Next slide, please. And as you saw earlier, there is a section of information that gathers screening for mental health concerns. The tool also has items that are integrated into the other domains that help us identify risk for violence. And then for those communities that are looking for the predictive piece of the tool, there is a level and a score, a risk score that comes out of the development or the calculation of the items. So next slide, I'll show you in the juvenile justice arena, there are several different levels, and depending on the community, the high category is sometimes also split into 2. But these levels of risk help create some decision matrices around which youth get what kinds of services. So youth that are low risk don't need as much intensity of service or intervention as the youth that are high risk. The research that we've done on validating the tool helps us get to this point to be able to look at what the levels mean, and you'll see that in a couple of slides. Next slide, please. So when we validated the tool, each of the specific items on the tool are validated, which means that a youth who has any of the individual indicators, even if they just have one, a youth who has that particular risk factor is more likely to end up with a juvenile justice involvement with a crime in the next 12 months than youth who don't have that factor. And it's also true that the tool is additive. So as you have, when youth have more risk factors, the more that they have contributes to higher risk. So just like you saw with the risk levels. We also tested how well the tool worked across groups, which I mentioned earlier. All of the items on the tool are scored and valid for youth regardless of race, gender, and age. And the group that was tested is primarily JCP focuses on the 10 to 17-year-old group. Once youth turns 18 in our state, they end up involved in the adult system. We also have youth who are served and involved in the studies actually as young as 6 years old. The 6 and 7-year-olds, there aren't very many of them, fortunately, but we do have within the samples some youth that are younger than 10. I just wanted to make the point too that even though the tool is validated for across groups, it doesn't mean that groups aren't different from each other. So we look at variability based on some groups being higher risk or having higher numbers of risk factors. But what we mean by validating across those groups is that the group itself doesn't contribute to the risk. So if you control statistically for the grouping, for race, for age, for gender, the impact that's left is the risk factor. And so we don't see those differences being risks themselves, but we do look at what are the specific characteristics of specific groups, because that helps us inform what kinds of services and what kinds of supports may be needed. So I just wanted to mention that the way that the tool works, the mechanism is the same. Having a particular risk factor or having a set of accumulated risk factors is true. It creates higher risk regardless of what other groupings or other demographic characteristics the youth has. Okay, next slide. This is a graph for anybody who likes graphs. I know not everybody will, but the idea is that in our validation, we had a statistical method that we called item response theory that helped us create the cut points. This is a very initial part of an early validation, but what you can see is the idea that on the bottom are the number of risks that you've had, so they are cumulative. You'll see that the red line shows that the more risks that you have, their probability of getting in trouble is higher. If you look at the line that goes down about in the middle, that is where the 14 is, youth that ended up with 14 or more risk factors, 14 translates into a probability of about 75%. So those youth who have that many risk factors, there's a 75% chance that they will have a criminal referral, regardless of whether they're in the system. They'll have a new criminal referral within a year. So that's how we're talking about risk, that we get these cumulative impacts and we have the ability to predict, not necessarily any particular child at a particular time, but the pattern of children, the pattern of youth over time. We know that those youth are likely to come back in contact with the juvenile justice system. It is also important to note that depending on the effectiveness of interventions, will also have the opportunity to affect this curve. Okay, next slide. And there are just a couple of items, because they come up as questions, I thought I would mention. And I've kind of already said this before, but Jcp Assessment gathers demographic information, but the scoring does not include a couple of areas, including race. So race is not a risk factor, even though we know youth of color are disproportionately impacted by our justice system and are more likely to reach the juvenile justice system. When you account for the impact of other risk factors, the impact of race is not statistically important. So again, we look at race and ethnicity and culture for making sure that we're matching services and making sure we're meeting needs and being appropriate with our interventions. But the assessment tool doesn't account for race as a risk factor necessarily. It looks at the impact of the other risk factors. The other piece that's important is sometimes we get asked about gang involvement, and particularly because YDD has some gang prevention activities. Gang involvement in and of itself is not a specific risk factor on the Jcp assessment. When the tool was originally developed, there was a lot of activity and conversation in the communities about how to be accurate about measuring gang involvement. And there was a lot of subjectivity and discrepancy that was creating racial disparities around who was considered gang involved. So the tool developers and the committee, the advisory committee, really felt strongly that other risk factors really account for what's going on if a youth is gang involved, rather than trying to create a more extensive training protocol for making sure people really understood how to do that definition. So we wanted to make sure, just so that you know, the gang involvement in and of itself is not measured, but other risk factors that might contribute would be. So if friends who are justice involved or getting into trouble, that's a risk factor. Behavior of the youth that's hurting other people is a risk factor. So there are all these other factors that might be associated, but that we don't have to specifically train our staff across the state on being able to recognize signs of gang involvement. Next slide, please. So the JCP, as I mentioned, is a risk reassessment. It helps measure change over time. It's typically measured every few months, so up to 6 months. The JCP programs will measure every 6 months. Some juvenile departments have a shorter reassessment period, and just to be able to look at those changes and make sure that we can take into account any adjustments that may need to be made. Next slide. I thought I would mention here that, and several of you on the call are involved in these efforts. There have been interest across different communities in how to conduct screening using the science and background of the Jcp assessment. And the quick screen is a way that we looked at the tool to pick out those strongest predictors in a particular community to be able to allow kind of this triage method. So a way to screen to see who should get the full assessment, or where could we help community partners identify youth who might need to have a more specific look or a more in-depth look. So there have been now 3 different counties who we've done specific validations to help identify those factors that are really high level predictors to help us know who should get the full assessment. There are several of those factors that are common across the different communities. So being a recent runaway is always, in every way that we've ever validated the tool and in community specific validations, hugely important to pay attention to. Having multiple criminal referrals, so 3 or more criminal referrals, that history really does predict additional involvements. Having substance use at a young age, so under age 13. So things that are important to pay attention to across community and to predict juvenile justice involvement. Next slide. So I think we're at the point where we can open it up to questions if people have comments that they want to make or ask questions. Here's our time to do that. And I don't know, Brian, if you have anything that you want to talk about, or Anya, in terms of preparing people for sharing, but feel free to ask any questions.
Yeah, well, thank you, Juliette. Yeah, I think we've got, and Melissa can help me with the time, about 10, 15 minutes for questions or comments. Really appreciate your presenting, Juliette. You know, my sense is that felt important to kind of ground our council in this fundamental tool in juvenile justice. Know too, and our juvenile justice experts can speak to how Oregon is doing this on a statewide basis in ways that many other states are not. And just as we think about being data-driven and evaluation and assessment oriented, this is something that I think is important for us to understand, right? As the statewide advisory group, which we have that responsibility as an overall council given our federal funding. So just appreciate that and want to open it up to any questions or comments. And the best way I think to do that will be for folks to like raise their hand, and Melissa or Lindsay or any one of us will like be looking on the multiple pages so that we can call on you, but that'll probably be the best way to manage that. So feel free, or if you have something you just want to drop in the chat, we can look there as well. But that's how we'll manage it for the next 10-15 minutes.
I have a sort of a question. This is Jaime, question and sort of a comment. As I look at your higher level goals and common measurement and the examples, what comes to mind with that is sort of helping our youth meet basic needs and gain stability. And I'm thinking, how do you measure self-actualization? That's part of our mission, right? Our full potentials for our youth. Where does the creativity show up? And the cultural piece about being all that we are, right? All that our youth are.
Yeah, that's a wonderful topic to think about. And how do you want to, what are the characteristics that are most meaningful? I think it reminds me of one of the things that we've worked on in terms of the strength-based service side has to do with hope, and whether or not, do youth have hope for the future? Can they envision themselves in a different situation than they're in, if they're in a difficult situation? What are those pieces of their life and their situation that sustain them or that strengthen them, that bolster them for the future? And I think those types of resiliency factors are really important too, because they help us, they help youth have the strength and the skills to manage anything that comes their way. So I think those are things to think about too, because young people, at least in our age group, are changing and capable of change. What are those factors that are important? Not necessarily have they achieved actualization or, but are they on that path to be able to do that? Do they have confidence? Do they have the belief that they can? Do they know how to reach out and get resources? Can they ask for help and get help? Do they have supports? I think all of those things might be worth talking about. And do they have something that excites them? Can they find their passion and find something meaningful to do with their energy? So I'm curious to hear other ideas that you have too.
I appreciate that, Juliette. I'll just say something that I learned from my youth not long ago about looking at youth as our mentors as well, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's just, there's a lot there.
They have a lot to teach us, yes. That's wonderful, thank you.
I have a question.
Yes.
Juliette, I had a question about specifically around the role, I guess, and how I guess it's incorporated into the tool, right? But the role, I guess, the neighborhood or perhaps the school or the community you're from. I'm thinking of, information around what zip code you're living in and what that says about being a lower risk, higher risk, or more likely to not be at risk. I don't know if that's how that's integrated.
Yeah, it's interesting because We found it a little bit challenging to identify how the neighborhood was going to impact. I know there's a lot of research now on the social determinants of health and how where you're from can have such an impact in your outcomes, both in terms of health as well as other social factors. The tool does have a question about the stability of the neighborhood or the community that the youth is in, kind of whether it's a low crime community. We found it very difficult. That was an item that was, we ended up changing it from a scored item to a planning, kind of a case planning item to have conversation about, particularly because, for a couple of reasons. One was the person who was doing the assessment might have sometimes had judgment about that community, and the youth might have felt completely comfortable and supportive there. So I think it's a little bit, it became less objective of a measure because there are different perceptions depending on who's making that judgment. Certainly we can have objective measure about the level of crime in a community, and we know that has an impact. But in terms of a youth being able to access resources, create, have positive decisions, or have positive paths within whatever community they're in, we found it was just a little bit more difficult to have as a scored factor because of that. So it is part of the tool, it's part of the conversation. We have that as a kind of as a protective factor, that if they're in a supportive community, then that's a strengthening tool, item of the tool. One of the things that we notice in some areas of the assessment is there are certain characteristics that are difficult to change, and they're difficult for the youth to have control over, and that's one of them. It became clear to us that there are some areas that are more ripe for intervention or more fruitful in terms of intervention, continuing the fruit analogy, that, for example, we have huge numbers of youth in our state who don't have involvements in extracurricular activities. This is even before COVID, right? So, but it's something that's achievable. It's something that we can do something about in many places. So, but whether or not they're in a home environment that's difficult or in a community that's difficult, it's harder. It takes more resources to make those kinds of changes. And so anyway, I think it's a really important point. I think it has huge impacts and implications for how the youth does. And it's important to think about where does that fit in terms of what's actionable about that.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thanks, Abraham. Other questions or comments? I know we've got lots of, our juvenile justice folks who actually are experienced with using the tool, and community partners who've used it in their work at the tribal level and other places. So keep it coming.
I saw Molly raise her hand. I have mine up too, but Molly, if you want to go first.
Molly, please.
Oh.
Yeah, Molly. How about Molly, then Cord? I didn't see the hand until now, or unless Molly's like ceding her time to you, Cord. I'm not sure.
I was just gonna say that there was a project, and I think Christina was part of the project, that there's a training that occurs that the juvenile directors participated in an inter-rater reliability tool. So there's also, the tool is validated, and then we also have gone as far as to validating how our people who administer the tool actually utilize the tool. And that work has been done as well, at least in the juvenile justice side, to make sure that we're trying to take some of the subjectivity out of the answers in the questions, so that that it is an objective tool. And it's not done at the first time you meet a youth. There's a period of time to get to know the youth for that as well. So there's a whole science behind the administration of the tool as well. So I really appreciate Juliette's presentation today of that piece, and then there's a second piece. And so I would be Christina, I know, has invested a lot of time and energy into this as well, and I would consider her by far an expert compared to me on this topic.
Okay, I would not agree with that, Molly, compared to you, but that's a nice compliment. I did want to say, coincidentally, we had, Juliette, you know, because you helped train these folks, we had an all-staff meeting today, and we invited our diversion, our community-based diversion provider, who is Latino Network, and they went through training with NPC Research, and they used the quick screen tool and the full Jcp tool, if that's called for. And they were doing a presentation about the diversion program to our staff and sharing how they use the tool and how meaningful it is. So it's just interesting timing. I was doing that at 9 o'clock this morning, and then here you are, Juliette. So,
oh, that's great.
And I also just wanted to say the comment you made about runaways, I think is so critical. That showed up in the quick screen tool that you put together for Clackamas County and validated. But we're really seeing, especially with COVID, there has been such an uptick. We already had a lot of runaways, but we're dealing with a lot of youth who are runaways. We operate in Clackamas County a 24-hour intake and assessment center, and police actually bring runaways to us, and we work with them and their families. So the need to really be getting upstream and working with identifying these young people and these families that are in conflict and really getting upstream is so important, because we've recently started capturing the anecdotal and qualitative data that we're getting from these young people and their families. And these are young people that, but for having been caught, would normally be in our system. So I really appreciated that you gave runaways a shout out, Juliette, because I think it's an area where, as state funding was lost, the need didn't diminish, and we're not addressing it fully the way we should be as a system, in my opinion. So anyway, just wanted to share that.
Thank you. I just wanted to say one other follow-up piece to what Molly was talking about related to the implementation and the inter-rater reliability. That effort that happened across the state came back to a planning committee, and we have utilized all of that feedback and information to do some updates to the tool. Those haven't actually rolled out fully, but they'll give some definitions and some explanations, some rewording of questions, and some revamping of how they're scored, in addition to some updates to the demographic characteristics. So that effort was really important in helping us kind of improve the quality of the work too. Thank you.
Can I add one thing really fast? Is that okay?
Can we go to Cord? Because I know Cord has had his hand up. So,
I'm so sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
Go Cord, and then we'll come to you, Ryan.
Okay, sure. So I guess my question is, you mentioned that in the tool, race is not used as a risk factor, that the other risk factors, you know, are significant in terms of data, whereas race is not. And I'm trying to kind of connect that back to the racial and ethnic disparities work, where we know that in some communities there are disparities in different contact points in the justice system. So can you kind of help me to reconcile those things? That, I mean, the tool is saying that the risk factors are independent of race, valid, but we know that in terms of justice system involvement, race is a big factor.
Yes, absolutely. I think I was just trying to make the distinction that there sometimes are some misperceptions that just because there's a prevalence, that there's also something kind of inherently different about groups that would affect how the risk factors play out. And that part is the part that I was trying to clarify, that really it's the risk, it's these other risk factors that are going on, that people who have if a group has higher numbers of risk factors, it's because of those circumstances that gives them higher likelihood to end up in the system. Not to mention that there's also racism and disparity in terms of how law enforcement sometimes makes decisions. That is also true, but it isn't about being a particular race that contributes to, it's not inherent to the person. Does that make sense? So it's
sure.
So, and I wanted to mention something about the disparities piece that's kind of interesting. One of the things that, one of the pieces of data that we've been looking at with YDD is the relative risk index, so the racial disparities measures that the juvenile justice system looks at. And the racial disparity, because our juvenile justice system in Oregon has been focused so much on trying to improve our decision points and our decision making once youth end up in our system, one of the really interesting things about the results right now is that you can see this huge disparity, racial disparity at arrest and kind of referral into the system, where you can tell like getting kids to that door is where a huge disparity is, but the disparities are much smaller now within the system once we look at getting, you know, what dispositions, detention decisions. So I think it's a real, it's an important impact that all of this work that people are doing and the awareness of how do we make, you know, objective decisions, how do we help support youth as well, you know, as much as we can to make sure that they don't progress in the system. We're seeing, you know, my interpretation is that some of that is actually having a positive impact. So yes, absolutely, the discrepancies are there. One example I can give you too is because we have, we do look at the proportion of, you know, how many risk factors different groups have. There are certain racial groups that start out with average numbers that are higher, but they also, when we looked at the validation, had a higher threshold before they reoffended. So they also had this resiliency, some of the protections built in. So there are differences between groups, but we were just trying to say that the race characteristic in and of itself wasn't used as a scoring. It was used as a control.
Sure, that makes sense. I think, you know, I guess, you know, I kind of have to work on the what I'm trying to understand is just the system risk, the decision point risk, and how that is accounted for. And that's really helpful to understand. I mean, as I got a private message, you know, that race is not a criminogenic factor, which I understand that. I think it's more trying to understand how this tool accounts for those decision points, but it sounds like the goal of the tool is to prevent you from reaching decision points where we are working to address that. So that's kind of helpful for my understanding. Is that correct?
Yes, and I mean, I think it's interesting. We you know, when this all first started, when we were doing this at the end of the 90s, one of the challenges that we were facing kind of systemically was there were a lot of services and resources in the juvenile justice system and a lot of research and knowledge about how do we help youth when they come to our door. And we were trying to also create opportunities and systems. This is one of the reasons why some of our other community grant making processes are so important, that we don't have to come to juvenile justice. Like a youth doesn't have to arrive in our justice system to be able to get services that they might need. Now, if they do, there are a lot, you know, there's a continuum of service that they can get, but we want to be able to find out if they haven't yet reached our system, what other supports can happen in the community to help avoid that law enforcement contact. I'm not sure if that answered your question, but.
No, that's helpful. And I think to Brian's point, I think maybe the better question would be how racism would be identified as a risk factor within that tool might be a better way to frame the question on my part. So yeah, that is helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the things that we've talked about a little bit is, and not really measured, is the impact of having different people. Who is the assessor? You know, who's asking the questions, who's building the rapport with the youth, who is intervening. That's why having, you know, a diverse workforce is so important. It's why having training around racism and structural concerns and trauma, you know, all of those factors, making sure staff really understand implicit bias, making sure people, you know, like having us all do our individual work so that when we're working with a range of youth that we can do that as well as effectively as we can. Ryan.
Yeah, no, this is great. I want to, oh yes, Ryan. You said Brian or Ryan? Ryan,
oh,
go.
I think Ryan was next. Sorry.
Yeah, he is. I was going to turn it to Ryan. We've got about 5 minutes. We can go a little over. Go, Ryan.
Yeah, for the non-facility council members, I just wanted to kind of connect this work a little bit. There's 300 facilities that we monitor, the YDD monitors in the state for compliance under the JJRA. 83.7% of them are law enforcement. And law enforcement are prohibited from having any juvenile status offender detained in their facility, with the exception they may be held for pending reunification and held for their own benefit. So there's this really interesting piece with that, just touching on all of this with regard to what Julie was saying, was that, you know, I mean, we have a lot of facilities we monitor. We're doing a lot of good work in the state. Nationally, we have one of the lowest rates of violations for status offenders being chronically put into detention. That doesn't happen very often here in Oregon. And so there's a lot of good work that I think is being done as well. And I just want to kind of echo that. And so I just wanted to put that out there for those that maybe didn't know. So.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. Sanji, I think you had a hand up or a comment.
Yes, thank you, Brian. Juliette, thank you so much for your presentation. I do have a question and a comment. My question is, are there not trends showing that particular groups of people tend to eventually conclude to be more at risk? Has that not been determined in any of your data analysis?
We know that, I think let me say one thing, and I'm not sure if it's answering your question. We know that some of the risks are cumulative, and we know that there are some risks that are much more prevalent. We have lots of youth who have certain kinds of risk factors, and that over time, as if we don't provide supports, if we don't intervene when youth are starting to accumulate these risk factors, they get more of them. So youth that are starting to have difficulty will escalate and start to have more over time. We know that there are certain factors that are uncommon until other factors have accumulated. So we tend to see some youth who are more likely to have a certain set of risk factors. We call these kind of like the high risk indicators. So there are certain indicators, certain risk factors from the tool that we tend to see high risk youth have them. We tend to see that youth get them after they have kind of built up a bunch of different ones. So when we see youth that have those indicators, even if they haven't shared everything, or even if they haven't shown up as being necessarily in that high risk group, staff in the juvenile departments may pay attention to them, or we've kind of looked at them specially because it does tend to be that those factors are more likely to contribute or be associated with the behavior of the higher risk group. In terms of other groupings, like, we do not see other characteristics that contribute necessarily, but it's usually those clusters of risk factors. That's the prediction of, you know, who ends up. Now, certainly, as I mentioned, starting to accumulate a lot of criminal referrals is likely to mean that they're going to get more referrals. Like, those kinds of things do tend to be predictive, and the history around youth that are acting out in a violent way, that violence may continue. You know, we may see that without intervention. So there are certain characteristics that make the future more likely in terms of crime, but demographically, we don't see that necessarily. Molly or Christina, do you want to comment on any other kind of?
And I did have a comment if they.
Yeah, I wasn't sure I was fully answering your question, Sanji, so I wasn't sure if our
and just to put that in there, like, for instance, referrals. We know that particularly African American and Native American youth are relatively numerous times more likely than their white counterpart to be referred. So if referrals and repeated referrals is a risk factor, at some point it seems that because it's happening in clusters of a culture or a race or ethnicity, that would contribute to them being more at risk. But I'm definitely no statistician, and I respect the work that you all have put into this, but I'm just throwing that out there. And then my other comment was, in some places, we've started to see that racism is becoming a public health crisis. And so if that is the case, and if, you know, that is something that is moving into the future, and it's weird to say this, but like, and I don't know, like, you know, research people could help maybe me to see if this is possible to, but like give them a weighted, and it's sad that you would have to do that, but to give certain races or ethnicity like a weighted score, because that we know, as Brian pointed out, that racism, prejudice, bias are barriers. And so like if you are a person of color, then you might be bumped up to be more high risk for that sheer reason.
Thank you. And yes, it's absolutely true that because Black and Native youth are more likely to have petitions, or I'm sorry, more likely to have referrals, that could influence that particular risk factor. What's the numerous referrals? Absolutely, that's a good point. I think what's important is that within our system now, we're seeing, once people do get involved, at least in Oregon, we've been able to remove some of that disparity in terms of who's detained, who has petitions, like the formal petitions. So coming into the system with a referral doesn't necessarily mean that there'll be a formal petition to court. And it was just really encouraging to me to see in our most recent disparity data, the disproportionality data, Black and Native youth aren't overrepresented in terms of detentions and petitions now. They still have more referrals, but somehow we've gotten the system to be able to self-adjust a little bit. It doesn't mean that things are perfect, but I think that does help us when you can intervene and help kids from ending up deeper into the system. We have that opportunity. But you're right, it's a good question about whether or not there's an opportunity, you know, there's some kind of statistical weighting that we would want to do. It'd be worth exploring that. Certainly that's just one factor out of all of the different ones on the tool. But it's definitely worth talking about that these systemic questions are complicated and really worth, you know, how we solve them can be, you know, there's some big changes that need to happen.
Absolutely. I think we really need to, it's incumbent upon us to dig deeper into that referral issue now, now that other decision points in the justice system are starting to reroute, but to allow the referral to be a similar accomplishment where that extreme disproportionality doesn't exist. But thank you very much for entertaining my questions and your answers. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Sanji.
Juliette, real quick, do you think, and could you speak to the ecological fallacy as it relates to individual level dynamic risk assessment and then aggregate characteristics?
Yes, maybe. Yes, the tool itself is an individual level tool. So we're looking at an individual child and their particular family situation, their particular peer group, their, you know, whatever's happening in their school. And so we are gathering information for this assessment at the individual level, because the initial purpose was to use it for individual level assessment decisions and interventions and services. But certainly the challenge, and I think this is kind of what Sanji was getting at too, the challenge is that some of those factors aren't individual level factors, right? They're community level, school level, family level factors. It's us understanding that full context of what's happening. But we do have a tendency to try to figure out what can we do for the youth to have, and we put that burden and kind of responsibility on how can we change this youth or how can we make sure the youth doesn't make this other decision, right? Or do this behavior that's going to end up creating crime or involvement in the juvenile justice system. I think we have certainly used those items, those proxies as aggregates, so pulling information across youth in our state, putting information across youth in a particular county or tribe to say, what is the profile, what are the factors that are kind of happening, what's going on within youth's lives that are impacting them and their involvements, and what does that mean about what we should do at the community level. It's not really a community measure, so you're absolutely right about that. It's, aggregate data about individual youth doesn't necessarily mean that we've got good measures at the community level, but it is a way for us to start to identify what are some of those impact points, or what are the potential impact points that I'm not sure I'm getting at exactly what you were trying to get at, but I think it's definitely important to make the distinction between if we have systemic issues or if we have community level issues, that how we are gathering that information might need to be a little bit different. So we may want to do some other data gathering, as well as think about what are the interventions that could impact, let me back up and say, one of the ways that people have used the data, the aggregate youth level data, is to be able to say, oh my gosh, 80% of our kids aren't getting extracurricular activities. Does that mean we have a problem, like we have this gap in our community and we need to invest in that particular support? Or is it because we can't get kids connected in some way? So having the conversation, it can kind of lead to the conversation of what's really the issue and then what the solutions might be, even though it's coming from individual, the individual source data.
Thanks, Juliette. We're over time, as you saw. Molly, quick question or comment from you. Then we're gonna just take I'm gonna call it like a 2-minute break, and then we're gonna turn it over to our next presenter. So Molly, to you, and then thanks everybody. Good, robust discussion. Appreciate it, Molly.
Sure. I just really appreciate the last part of the conversation of what this tool really is doing and how it is used, and that it's one tool in a whole broader conversation is what I would hope. It's definitely used that in the juvenile justice area, because there's a whole bunch of other tools. So actually, Juliette's last comments really kind of hit where I wanted to go.
Great. Well, yeah, again, thanks everybody. Thank you, Juliette. We'll give you hand claps, however people want to do that. Maybe the reaction tool. Appreciate it. We'll just take literally you got 60 seconds. And so, yeah, turn your screens off, do what you got to do. We'll be right back. Grace, we're going to get started with you again. Thank you, Juliette.
Hello, Brian.
Grace, we'll pull your presentation up, and then we'll give people a minute here to get back.
Okay. Our model changed slightly as of yesterday? Is it possible to get you an updated version, or is it too late?
If it's not, that last thing you sent was like 60 megabytes. If it's not that, then it was huge. But
yeah,
here's the other thing, Grace. And Melissa, I should shut my mouth, but Melissa, can we have Grace share her screen? And Grace, are you comfortable doing that?
Absolutely, that would make life much easier.
Okay, perfect. You can have it, Grace. Thank you.
Yay.
All right, we'll be back in a sec.
Okay.
All right. I see some faces coming back online. Hopefully we'll see Grace's. Thanks, everybody. Melissa or Lindsay, what do we have in terms of public comment? Any sense of that?
I was just checking with Lindsay, but let's see if she's back from break.
Okay.
I just chatted her.
Yeah. That's just for everybody to know, and we're excited to have guests listening in. But if we don't have public interested in speaking, then we can make sure we can go a little longer and just go right up until or maybe we'll, at 3:55 or so, both for Grace's presentation and then some questions and comments. But if we have comments, we might need to, we'll have to stop a little earlier. So, well, whenever most of you can figure that out, maybe you can send a chat or.
Ryan, there haven't been any. Oh,
great! Hey, thank you, Lindsay. I see that. Once Grace, we're going to turn it over to you here in just 2 seconds. Basically, maybe once we are done with the presentation, we'll just kind of give some time checks, right? And we'll, if any guests arrive or come in and let us know that there's interest in a comment, then we'll at the 3:45, 3:50 time frame, I'll help facilitate so we can manage the end of our session. But this is our last presentation of the day. Really, day one was just about kind of giving everybody some, food for thought and consideration. Really appreciated Juliette's focus on this juvenile crime prevention, really, but broader, taking a step back, right, thinking about risk factors and protective factors and individual level data and work. And so Grace is going to talk to us about a mental health framework, and I think will be a good and really helpful point of reference, really around maybe broader systems needs and shifts. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Grace Bullock, who works with the Oregon Department of Education. Grace, you should do more of a self-introduction, and hopefully, since I don't have your title memorized, we'll go from there. Thanks, Grace.
You don't have my title memorized?
I know. I'm sure I could look in the email and find it.
Holy cow. I'm kidding. Well, thank you, Brian, and hi, everyone. It's a real pleasure and an honor to be here. My name is Grace Bullock. I'm the Senior Mental Health Strategist at the Oregon Department of Education in the Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. Just knowing how these days go and that you have been sitting and staring at a screen for a long time, I wanted to practice what I teach, which is, taking good care of self. And so I do not have a ton of content intentionally because I wanted to make sure that there was space for conversation, and also that if there's a gift of time that could be had, that we could do that too, knowing that you've been sitting and staring at a screen for quite a long time. So having said that, I'm going to try to get my screen share up and running here. So give me 1 second. Oh, good, it's working. And hopefully I can see all of you in a second. There we go. All right. So just a little bit about why our team was formed and why I'm here before I dive into all of the nitty gritty. The Oregon Department of Education and our partners at the Oregon Health Authority recognize that mental health is really a cornerstone of education. And as a function of that, there was an intention to honor that and try to create more space for that. And the product was that our team was formed. So I was hired 13 months ago, I think we're at now, and all of our team has come on board. We're a team of 4 now, within the last year, so we're a fairly new team. But our charge was to try to figure out how to blend a bunch of different pieces of work that affect a lot of the work and efforts that are going on, not only at the Oregon Department of Education, but also with our partners at the Oregon Health Authority. If you're not familiar with the way that the agencies are constructed, the Oregon Health Authority is responsible for a lot of the school-based mental health service delivery pieces. So they grant out and have contracts for school-based mental health. They work a lot with community-based organizations and coordinated care organizations. So they take care of a lot of the service delivery pieces. They're also responsible for administering the school-based health centers, which also have school nurses and their mental health components. So there's a very big system that hasn't historically always been very tightly integrated. And so that's been a big part of our work, is to bring all of this work together and become trusted partners so that we can create more of an integrated approach to mental health prevention, intervention, and in the case of suicide, postvention. So that is the intention behind why this team was created. So a little bit about what I'm going to cover in the short period of time that we have together. I'm going to talk about an integrated model of mental health, which is very much a living framework that we are using to organize the work within the Oregon Department of Education, as well as the partnership and the collaboration with the Oregon Health Authority, and other partners, school districts, education service districts, etc. I'll talk a little bit about the guiding values behind that model, and show you a little bit about how we're beginning to bring that model into practice through the mental health toolkit, and then talk about where we go from here and create some space for conversation. So historically in education, a lot of the work that's been done in spaces related to mental health prevention, promotion, and services and supports have been done and organized around content areas. And that is not unusual for Oregon. That is pretty typical to education. I've worked nationally in education spaces as a psychologist, and often when I work in other states, in addition to Oregon, people are focused on one or two initiatives. Social emotional learning is very very important, and it's very widely used across the country. There is a lot of work both within Oregon and outside of Oregon on trauma-informed care and trauma-informed principles and practices. In recent years, there's been much more focus on equity, racial equity, and anti-racism. So thinking about how is that integrated, meaningfully integrated, and considered in school environments. And historically, all of these things are delivered in some way, shape, or form through what is called a multi-tiered system of supports. So tier 1 is universal education. So you might see social emotional learning or trauma-informed or equity-centered principles and practices appearing maybe in health education, maybe throughout the educational spectrum. So you might see bits and pieces in STEM classes or art classes. So that is basically the support that all students receive relative to any one of these content areas or their combination. Tier 2 is focused more on targeted interventions. So for students where there is an identified need, tier is a long day for me today. Tier 2 services might look like small group interventions or skill building classes. So it's bringing together students with common concerns or needs for common support and delivering those supports in more of a group setting. And last but not least, tier number 3 is related to more intensive interventions. So for students that need more intensive one-on-one services and support, that would be where that would fall. Or for students who, if there's a suicide prevention, intervention, or postvention, the intervention or postvention pieces would be typically occurring in tier 3. So the tiers are used as a way to organize the work so that throughout the educational setting, there is some sense of understanding about how the work is allocated and who is performing it. And by that, I mean, tier 1 can be performed by teachers or nurses. Sometimes nurses can perform tier 2, but as you get into more high acuity, high intensity service needs, that is when you need licensed mental health professionals to provide the services. So this is how we've looked historically. These, again, these areas have been often treated separately and siloed, which creates certain problems. The first being that you might have social emotional learning instruction that's not trauma informed or equity centered. You often see trauma informed work that doesn't necessarily make use of social emotional learning principles or practices, and may also not be equity centered or may not be strengths based. And I'll talk a little bit more about what that means and why that matters in a minute. So our team was formed to begin to try to create some semblance of order where these bodies of work could be aligned and integrated, so that we were no longer dealing with what one of my colleagues calls the siloification of these particular content areas. So this was the first attempt at a model. If you are old enough to remember the Simon game, that was actually what inspired this model. And the Simon game basically was this electronic device that is so antiquated, it's kind of funny, but it had 4 different tones to it. And so if you just press one tone all the time, you just got one thing. And so the point was that you need to incorporate the voices, the tones, the content, the brilliance, the understanding into an integrated model in order to really truly fulfill the potential of all of these various constituent parts. So Oregon Department of Education, and this is one of the values that drew us to the work, was that the Oregon Department of Education recognized that mental health and well-being was essential and a cornerstone of education, and that without attending to the health and mental health needs of students, families, staff, and leadership, that the potential for individuals to thrive was significantly attenuated, because as you can imagine, if people have other pressing needs, it's really hard for them to teach or learn or be present. So this is the original version of the model, which has been further articulated into the much more complicated version of the model. And I'll walk you through that now. But first I want to draw your attention to this bottom strip here in gray. And it basically is there for a very important reason. We don't want to ever give you the impression that mental health, occurs again in a silo or in exclusion, but it is absolutely necessary that we think about mental health and well-being along a continuum of care. So without addressing basic physiological needs, for those of you that have been in Salem or places where you lost power, you'll know that, when you don't have power, when you don't have food, when you don't have running water, everything else stops until those basic physiological needs are met. So we have to make sure that we're attending to all of these, basic human needs. Safety and security, again, if you're in a circumstance where you're not feeling safe and secure, whether it's at home or school or your community, it's very difficult to focus on your mental health because you're focusing on survival. We all know this year in particular, thank you to COVID, that relationships, connection, community, those proximal touch points are so incredibly important to promoting and preserving our health, and that purpose and self-efficacy, voice and choice, having agency, being able to make decisions for your life and your health and well-being are so important. And then those are all necessary and sufficient in order to create environments and individuals that can thrive to their full potential. So this continuum of care is extremely important. But I'm going to now draw your attention to the model. I'm not seeing the chat. I'm seeing that numbers are popping up, but unfortunately I can't see it. So Brian, if I need to just keep going, okay. If I need to pay attention, just flag me and I'm more than happy to stop. But I'm going to walk you through the model beginning at the bottom in blue. So by necessity, this work needs to be equity centered. And we need to make sure that we are not only delivering access, equitable access to services and supports, but that the access to the services and supports are culturally and linguistically competent and responsive, that we are making sure to hold self-determination and the ability for people to make decisions for themselves as paramount, that we are working within communities and forming strategic partnerships so that whatever is done is initiated and supported within the community itself rather than coming from a top-down model, that we're acknowledging and aware of bias and how there are structural barriers and structural constructs that support and promote and continue to support and promote oppression and marginalization, et cetera. So without recognizing that those systems occur and without making a commitment to do something about them, we tend to continue just to perpetuate the white dominant culture, and that has significant bearing on the mental health and well-being, particularly of students of color or students who have not historically been recognized as being, gosh, I don't even know the word, is important enough in the system as others. And so it's really important to recognize that in order to dismantle it and create systems that are equitable for all. Strengths-based, the yellow bubble, again, you'll start seeing overlaps with these concepts, but it is imperative that whatever we do in the mental health space or in education or in the work that you're all talking about, that it be strengths-based. And as someone who has been trained, in an American university as a psychologist who has worked in research and education, when I stepped back and started looking at how much deficit-based information is just baked into the way we do business, I was shocked, and this happened years ago, but even how I communicate with you, the language that I use, how I show up, how this is presented. I work in a field where we talk a lot about assessment and diagnosis and treatment, fixing what is broken. I don't use that term, but the general idea is that, there are kids who are less than, who are broken, that need to be fixed. And whether it's in education, mental health, or, juvenile justice, whatever space you're in, as long as we're giving anyone in the system the message that there's something wrong with them, we are again perpetuating an inequity, perpetuating a form of oppression that makes it very difficult for people to thrive. And this is a real problem. And this is part of what we're trying to address and the strengths-based recognition of this model. Third, the trauma-informed principles and practices, again, extremely critical to the work. We've added a few additional components to the trauma-informed, the 6 traditional principles, again, recognizing that food and shelter and safety, voice, choice, relationships, all of these things are absolutely integral to creating systems where students can thrive in promoting their mental health. Last but not least, social emotional learning, which is a very robust field and has had a lot of application in educational spaces, a lot of wonderful work there. And the focus is much more specific to competencies like self-awareness, social awareness, relationship skills, healthy decision-making, self-regulation. And we are wanting to build this out a little bit more holistically to include cultural identity development, health and sex education, and not appearing here, but I also think that, environmental consciousness, environmental justice, recognizing the impacts of what is happening in the environment on students' mental health is also important to consider. So this is a really, in some ways, simple model, but in some ways complex model. We developed it and have spent, it was started in April. So I've spent the last 6 or 9 months, I'm losing track of time in COVID time, but talking to others, including Brian and his team, about this model and getting feedback and trying to make sure that what we're proposing is something that is actually relevant and doable. And now we're moving into the stage of talking much more broadly to community partners, affinity groups, and all various constituents that touch mental health and well-being across the state, getting their feedback, but also rolling up our sleeves and really thinking very carefully about what does this model look like, sound like, feel like in practice, and also how do we support the work across the state to make sure that whatever is needed to the best of our ability, we can provide in terms of resources, technical assistance, and support. So I'm going to talk a little bit now about the mental health toolkit. The toolkit was designed to be the first iteration of information that would help to flesh out what this actually looks like in practice. And the toolkit has a number of different components that I'll go through. And again, I'm just going to articulate the guiding values behind the work that are very similar to the guiding values behind the model. Again, the first is that the mental health is really one of the cornerstones of education, and we have to recognize its importance when we think about what we do in the business of education. That health occurs along a continuum of care, and we have to make sure that basic needs are met in order to promote and sustain mental health. That schools are primary providers of mental health services. There are data that show that in the United States, approximately 70% of students have schools as their major touch point for mental health services. So schools are really one of the central hubs where students are provided access to services. And that's particularly true for students who historically have not had access to quality mental health services because they don't have access because of insurance reasons or otherwise. So schools are really significant hubs. And that obviously, it goes without saying that students and adults do better in their lives and in their worlds and in their schools when their mental health needs are met. And to the exclusion of that, it's really hard for students and faculty and staff to grow and thrive when they're busy taking care of fundamental needs around their physical safety, their mental health, their health and well-being. So again, actually, I didn't say this before. When I first started taking this model out into the world, one of the first bits of information I got was a lot of resistance back about using the term mental health. And so I want to make sure that I'm really making a clear distinction between mental health and mental illness. And I think that a lot of times they're used interchangeably. So when we talk about mental health, there's an assumption that we're actually talking about psychopathology or mental illness. We are specifically focused on mental health promotion, and that includes prevention, services, and support. We are not in any way focusing on the fixing what's broken, language, deficit-based, etc. Understanding that what occurs in practice in terms of assessment, diagnosis, treatment, those terms and that language is necessary and important to make sure that students get the services that they need, but we don't want to orient around them. And I think that'll be a little bit more clear when I talk about trauma. So again, we want to make sure that we are strengths-based, and that means celebrating the ways of being and knowing of people in school communities. So often, non-traditional practices, for example, faith-based practices, the way that families gather and support each other in crises, those necessary coping mechanisms aren't often recognized by the system as means through which families and students are able to cope with stress and trauma and use that. Those are not considered necessarily protective factors or resilience builders, particularly in some mental health spaces. So we want to make sure that those ways of being and knowing are recognized as part of this system of care. Again, supported by the 4 pillars of practice, which were the 4 colored circles, strengths-based and centered on collaboration, equity, flexibility, and most importantly, meeting communities and individuals within communities exactly where they are, and not getting caught up in the language of should and stories, but making sure that we're meeting needs exactly where they need to be met and no other place. So resources, moving from model to actual content. We released in December an updated, vastly expanded mental health and well-being website. It includes a couple of things that I want to draw your attention to. One is this model that I just presented to you. It comes in a downloadable version. So as we present this information and get into these conversations with districts, they are often taking this model and bringing it into their communities and districts and using it as a place to center conversation, which is exactly how it was intended. The mental health toolkit I'll talk about in a moment. There's also a downloadable version of the toolkit, and the Spanish translation is forthcoming. Mental health guidance and resources, there is a plethora of good, well-vetted guidance and resources in this area, and it's broken down by content area. So there's information for students and parents, there's information for educators and mental health professionals and leaders, and it's all divided. I'm about to sneeze, so I apologize. I think it's gone. All right, and I'll talk a little bit about the Strengthening in Mental Health and Education Initiative, which is a collaboration that we are engaged in with the Oregon Health Authority. Our team is also responsible for ADDIES Act, which is Senate Bill 52, which instructs districts to have transparent and comprehensive plans to address suicide prevention, postvention, and intervention. We are also, and I think this work really aligns well with what Brian and his team's doing. We're working on a school safety and prevention system through Section 36 of the Student Success Act. And that work is working with education systems to really reconsider how it is that school safety and prevention, safety assessments, threat assessments are done, so that we can hope to influence you call it the school to detention pipeline, Brian, so that we can intervene rather than continuing to promote systems where students of color in particular are considered threatening. And then lastly, our team has had a central role in what is now called the Every Student Belongs rule, which was passed by the Oregon School Board last week. And that prohibits the use of the noose, the battle flag of the Confederacy, and Nazi symbols of hate in any school environment. So that's another piece of our team's work, is really focusing on culture and climate. And what does it take at a systems level to create environments where all students and every student feels as though they belong? All right, so quickly about what the toolkit contains. The toolkit was created in collaboration again with the Oregon Health Authority, and it contains some really carefully vetted resources that school districts, it was designed specifically for school districts to work within their communities, but it is accessible, I hope, to parents and families should they choose to use it. But it was focused on school-based mental health professionals and staff and leaders to use as a tool to help promote and elevate mental health services and supports. So we lead with strengths-based strategies. Again, I've spent a fair bit of time talking about what that is and the values behind it. But there are some really nice tools there that provide some resources about how to make that happen. Addressing traumatic stress, I think for me personally, is one of the most important pieces of the toolkit, particularly in this year of COVID and then the fires and the ice storms. There is a very robust and continuous conversation about trauma in our communities and in our schools. And what concerns me about that conversation is that it becomes an organizing place that energy is put, rather than, again, focusing on strengths, ways of knowing and being, etc. When the focus becomes trauma exclusively, we get back to that mentality of needing to fix what's broken. In reality, a very small percentage of people who experience traumatic stress actually go on to develop post-traumatic stress disorder. And a lot of people have great tools, ways of being, knowing, cultural tools, etc., that allow them to thrive in the face of a lot of traumatic stress. And we see that every day. So when we focus on trauma, all that we do is negate all of the beautiful resiliency factors that are going on around us. And I'm not saying that we don't need to focus on trauma and know how it affects behavior, whether it's of the adults or the students, But to organize around it, I think really does not do a service to school communities, and we need to make sure that we keep it in context. Elevating student voice, again, going back to some of the key principles of equity and trauma-informed principles and practices, making sure that students have voice and choice and agency and are involved, meaningful participation in the decisions about their lives. Centering equity, racial equity, and anti-racism. We have some really great tools, and we're always welcome to get more if you know them, but how to center equity, racial equity, and anti-racism in the educational system. What does that look like? What do we need to do to make sure we're creating environments where every student feels as though they have a place in that school that is equal, if not better than what they had previously. Promoting inclusive school environments. Again, we're really talking about systems change, culture shift. How do we create spaces where all students, every student, all staff members, families, whoever touches the educational environment feels as though they are seen, heard, valued, and appreciated, and that there is no longer, how shall I say it, a dominance hierarchy that makes school settings unappealing or aversive, or that continues to promote the inequitable access to educational opportunities and mental health supports that has historically been a part of how education's been delivered in the state. And lastly, how does that show up in terms of the multi-tiered systems of support? How do we make sure that these offerings are occurring in their proper places and that we have the workforce that will support that work? So last but not least, I wanted to draw your attention to the Strengthening Mental Health and Education initiative that we've been engaged with the Oregon Health Authority. We applied as a state to CASEL, which is the National Social Emotional Learning Organization, and CCSSO, which is the National Organization for School Administrators. And we were accepted as one of 9 states across the country to participate in an initiative to figure out how to build out this work. And so we collaborate with other states, we connect with them, we receive some technical assistance. And interesting story, since I have a little bit of time, when this request for proposal initially came out, the focus for them was specifically social emotional learning and multi-tiered systems of support, which does not align with our model. And we had a very frank conversation with them saying that, you know, the model is the direction that we want to take. And if that wasn't going to be supported, we were fine with that, but we weren't going to apply. They encouraged us to apply and we were accepted. And since then, as we have more conversations with states, in particular Hawaii, which is wonderful, there's much more now receptivity to the fact that these pieces can be integrated meaningfully and we can move forward with this work in a way that does create alignment around these various formerly siloed pieces of the work. So the initiative has 5 goals. The first is to develop this model and make sure that it's aligned with the work that the Oregon Health Authority is responsible for in terms of school-based mental health. That is done. We did a statewide mapping of the school-based mental health resources. Interesting exercise, I won't say more, but we have some work to do in terms of coordinating data collection, particularly because we collect data in different ways, and that I think there's some legislation that is going to session that may or may not address that issue. But really one of the main reasons why this initiative is so important is that it will allow us to create really content-specific legislative asks and legislative blueprints for the future. When we first began this work, we didn't have the current session really in our consciousness because we knew that we wouldn't get the work done in time for the current legislative session. Interestingly, there's been a lot of energy around mental health, particularly for students in the current legislative session. So having done this work has allowed us to, I hope, positively influence some of the legislation that is in play right now and hopefully will be passed and funded. So that is a third goal. Evaluation of impact, I can talk a lot more about it, but essentially, again, going back to the general values and premises of this model, really looking at how we do assessment and an evaluation in academic contexts, and paying really clear attention to what is the function of assessment, what message is it giving to students. Are we, doing summative assessments of learning, or should we be really paying attention on formative assessments for learning so that we can better learn as a state and as districts how to best serve kids? And that is a very different mindset than, looking specifically at test scores and making decisions. So we really want to begin to focus on evaluation for learning, understanding what is happening in schools, so we can use that information to help not only create legislative blueprints, but also to think about how does culture and climate, mental health, racial equity and equity show up in education, and what do we need to do better? And last but not least, in the agency, having some very dedicated conversations about, where do we go from here and how do we center education in a way that honors the health and well-being of school communities, and also really elevates the ways of being and knowing that the school communities are so richly abundant in. So in terms of moving forward, this year we are engaged in a lot of work with communities, and I can just give you some examples of folks we're working with now. There are a number of groups of mental health providers in schools that we are meeting with. I'm meeting with people that provide migrant education services, so family support specialists and migrant ed, because I want to make sure that we are landing this really well with them and that we're providing them with resources. We are talking with the COSA, which is the Organization for Oregon Administrators, to see what needs to be built so that we're supporting leadership, and that leadership understand what needs to happen in order to promote mental health in schools, with professional organizations, et cetera. So there's a real intentional engagement plan that we are beginning to undertake right now to get in conversation about the model and begin to understand how we can best serve those needs, and also what technical assistance we need to provide in order to make that happen. I will also add that the Student Success Act now has coming online some contract work to support this as well. So our hopefully our breadth and our outreach will be bigger and continue to be funded so that we can make sure that we've got, that we're able to impact the state in the way that we're hoping. So yeah, we're forming communities of practice. We embrace and welcome feedback. I would love to hear your thoughts about this. We've got, I don't know, I'll say 20 minutes, Brian, because I'm sure you'll want to wrap up, or if you want to give folks the gift of time, also good. That I'm here to respond to thoughts, questions, curiosities, conflicts, whatever comes your way.
Thanks, Grace. Maybe you'll stop sharing and we can bring everybody back together. Appreciate that. Yeah, unless Melissa or Lindsay tells me we've got other public comment, I think we can probably go till just about 3:55. What I first want to do is say thanks for providing this. I think it's helpful to have like this kind of systems perspective and the educational perspective. So we appreciate that. I know there's a question in the chat from Elizabeth that is pretty specific to kind of services. So Elizabeth, I see your comment. I just want to, we may be able to get to it, but it does seem pretty specific, and maybe though some folks on the call on the Zoom here will have a perspective around that. So I just want to tell you, I see it. I'm not sure we'll be able to get to it specifically.
Yeah.
Before I get to just general questions and comments, I do want to recognize our youth subcommittee members, And I know we've got a couple either on the phone or on the Zoom. I was able to be in a small group breakout with Diana, but appreciate their continued engagement with the council and with our retreat. But I would love to ask if either of our, and maybe there's more than two, of our youth subcommittee members have any comments or questions. I frankly, from the first presentation from Juliette, but also more specifically from Grace, no pressure. I'm not trying to put you all on the spot. If you do, though, want to give you first crack, so to speak, at any comments or questions, Diana and Maricela, and if I'm not sure if ISA2 or Destiny is on, feel free to jump in.
Thanks, Brian, for the opportunity. I didn't see ISA2 or Destiny log on. I don't have any questions or comments at this time, but I'll pass it to Diana if she does.
Thanks, Maricela.
Thanks, Maricela. Thanks, Brian. Yeah, I don't have any comments or concerns. Thank you.
Of course, thank you both. So with that, I will, again, ideally put up a hand, and Melissa or Lindsay will help me see it so that we don't jump all over each other. So if you just want to raise your hand if you have a comment or question for Grace, that would be great. I see Jaime has thrown a question here in the chat. I don't see any other hands. Grace, do you see that question? Do you want to start with that one and then we'll kind of go from there?
I am muted. I'm talking to myself. Are you referring to Jamie's question?
Yeah, Jaime. Yep.
So
Jaime, how are you using ancestral knowledge and wisdom to inform this model?
That's an excellent question, and I've had a number of conversations with our Office of Indian Education, as well as convening a work group around thinking about trauma specifically to communities of color and tribal communities, and they have been extremely influential in terms of thinking about this model. One of the major values I came into this work with was just recognizing that so much of what's happened in mental health spaces, and forgive me for saying this, but I think it's true, is it's white supremacy with a hug, and that we really need to drill down and figure out exactly what we've been doing that's not working. And you just have to look at the data to see that tribal communities, communities of color have not been served well in the system. And it's not unique to mental health, but it's definitely a concern. So we had we had several conversations with them about the model as it was forming, and they were instrumental in coming up with the language around ways of knowing and being, and the need to really honor and recognize those ways of knowing and being, and that we needed to think outside, as you say, this is a beautiful question, just the way that it is written about being very human-centric, but also, this is just a living document and something to begin to facilitate conversation. And there will be more and different ways of looking at this. It's meant to organize work, but not to dictate it. So, yeah, so there has been involvement, but obviously we have a long way to go and a lot of conversations that still need to be had.
Thank you. And I saw Celeste, you put something in the chat. Go, Celeste.
Yeah, thanks. Grace, you ended your presentation just now talking about communities of practice. Mm-hmm. And I'm really curious about, I know the framework was just released, and so there's a lot when you begin with implementation. From a YDD perspective, there is a lot of really important mental health services and supports that happens not within districts and not necessarily within government, but within community-based organizations that are doing work in partnership. Mm-hmm. And so when you talk about coming together to form the communities of practice, I'd love to just hear a little bit more about like what we should what that might look like at a district level, but also what might that look like at a community-based organization level, potentially some of our YDD grantees in particular.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I'll start by saying that I have a very ambitious engagement plan. So we're just early on in it. So there are two avenues that we're taking right now. One is in conversation with work groups. I'll give you an example. So education service districts often have people that are leading up and responsible for mental health for their service districts. They have groups that get together, and so we're connected with them and unpacking this. The school safety and prevention specialists that are part of the school safety and prevention specialist work, deeply in conversation with them about this. Oh my gosh, so migrant education with AMESC and also with internal migrant education, talking to them about what specific needs in families that we need to make sure that we're accounting for. Our partners at Oregon Health Authority have groups of mental health professionals that are from CBOs and CCOs. And so those professionals get together, they facilitate those groups, but we work in partnership with them and we visit whenever we're invited. We come in and facilitate discussions. And then today I was part of a group of school counselors that is also really interested and invested in the work. So to the best of our physical, literally capacity to participate, we're engaging in as many groups as possible, beginning with, because of outreach, we're trying to respond to those who are approaching us first. The focus has been a lot on those providing mental health services and supports within educational settings, as well as those who aren't necessarily considered part of formal mental health service delivery, like school nurses, like community mental health providers, community, my brain is starting to go, I apologize. There are a lot of community-based health providers that are not part of the mental health system, promotoras, community health workers. People are embedded in communities that are providing very important mental health services and supports, but they're not recognized formally in the system. So we're spreading out and trying to engage as many people in this conversation as possible. And the plan will continue to develop at this point in response to the need, so where the need is greatest. Did I get, okay, cool. Thanks for the thumb.
That's helpful. And I also see in the chat that Elizabeth reframed her question.
Exactly. Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you, Celeste. Yeah. I don't know if you're seeing the question, Grace.
I'm reading it.
And I'll just real quickly, Grace, or I wonder if other folks have any perspective. Elizabeth, we appreciate the question. So yeah, if youth are showing high risk behaviors, but assessments do not show that they rise to the level to be considered high risk, how do you make sure those youth are not falling through the cracks in assessing services and resources? That, Grace, you may have a perspective on that. Juliette, you might as well, or Molly or Christina, but yeah, any thoughts on that? Thanks, Elizabeth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I can start just by saying that this has been a real concern, particularly in remote learning, because we're not seeing students in person. And so where we might be able to witness those behaviors or observe them on a frequent basis, that has been much more of a challenge. And the Oregon Health Authority has been working really hard to continue to create a more robust telehealth system. And we have been, I will say, imperfectly doing the best we can to support those on the ground providing mental health services and supports and education, try to find ways to work with their school districts in order to have that access. Oregon is a local control state, so each school district does things differently or can do things differently. And so some districts, for example, allow for a lot of access and direct connection with students through online learning platforms where others don't. So it has been really challenging to make that happen. But that is a real service delivery question. I wish one of my partners at OHA was here with me, because I think that they would be able to give you a more direct service delivery related answer. But Juliette, I missed your presentation, so you may be that person.
I don't think I'm the person either. I mean, I think that particularly because I was talking more about services related to, potential juvenile justice involvement or other concerns, but absolutely that we always have the challenge of assessing and then trying to make the best match to services that we can and hope that there are the right services available. But I think that at least in the juvenile justice system in Oregon, one of the ways that they've gotten around this challenge is they've created an override process. So if a youth is not assessing at the level that someone's professional judgment says, gee, there's something else going on here, they do have a case-by-case opportunity to explore further. And so, there may be some systemic ways or some policy and procedure ways to kind of create some safety nets, especially for youth who either aren't willing to share or aren't able to share, or somehow those criteria just aren't lining up to get them access to service. Clearly there's something wrong in our system if we can't really support the youth the way that they need to be supported. I'm sure that's so frustrating for you. Gosh, I was feeling for you.
Before I was I'm asking the question because before I was a prevention coordinator, I was working in child welfare, and there was one girl, and she just went through every foster home imaginable, and she had all those behaviors that I was specifically mentioning before. I mean, at 15, she was already an alcoholic, and she was also showing some, physical aggression, verbal aggression, and all the list of stuff. And because she was a runaway, she wasn't eligible for places like the Children's Farm Home, and a lot of the treatment centers wouldn't take her. So child welfare had to take her all the way to Iowa, to a lockdown facility because there was no place here to take her. And then I had another situation where, a girl had been sexually molested at a young age, and she had a lot of aggression and violence towards her parent at home. And but because she wasn't showing any physical aggression or any problems at school, places like the farm home didn't think she qualified for their program as for residential facility. So it's like, these kids, some of them are on the cusp of needing services, but because they're not doing certain things, they're not able to get it. In the first one, she actually she was showing signs of suicidal ideation and threats of harm and stuff like that. So, but because she didn't have a plan for suicide, she was actually taken to the hospital, and the county talked to her and said, do you have a plan for suicide? And she didn't have a plan or access, so they just discharged her from the hospital.
Thanks.
And so,
we're getting up on time here, so we appreciate the context. We're getting near the end of the hour here.
Yeah, I understand.
No, I appreciate those kinds of situations and cases. We hear you, Molly. You had a comment, and literally we just have space probably for a couple more, maybe one or two more, and appreciate the input and conversation. And if there are any other specific questions for Grace, go ahead, Molly.
Yeah, no, I actually think that the two conversations that we've had today bring up an interesting dilemma. Is the word assessment gets thrown around so fast and used so many times. And so as I'm thinking about policy level work at ODE and YDD, this notion of assessment it's kind of bugging me today. And I don't know when I want to talk about it other than I want to put a pin in it to hold that space because what we determine as high risk for one thing is different for high risk for another. And so it's confusing to me, and I've lived in the business a long time. So I just want to put a pin in that moment.
Thanks, Molly. And probably assessment and or evaluation, and somewhere in Juliette's conversation, maybe it was Bill or someone said like individual level assessment versus what is happening at a more systems, or well, there's somewhere a community level assessment and understanding, and then there's systems or multi-systems level sort of assessment. And yes, we're kind of talking about multiple levels. So thanks for that comment. Important for us to be able to differentiate or at least see where, yeah, there's potential crossover attention. Other points? Celeste wrote in a comment, appreciate that, in the chat. Anybody else? It's quiet. All right.
One question or one point of feedback that we might want to talk about at some point later on in the retreat is that there might be opportunities to invite Grace or invite NPC Research to speak to our grantees. I found this really interesting and helpful. I know that the juvenile departments, for example, do have a nice relationship with NPC and are using a very specific tool that is really important, where they're collecting data and then using it to transform action. And it's different than a framework. But I think that too, community-based organizations are a really important part of district services. And so as the state is supporting districts in their own alignment with frameworks, I think it's important to bring the community into the conversation. And so we might be an avenue for that. We haven't done a lot of that in the past, but we certainly have a place to play as being a transformative space where community-based providers that do really essential student support services come together and are funded. So really, as our role as a convener in this youth development space, I just want to put a pin in that for the council members and for staff, because that might be an important action when we think about our strategic priorities that we can play going forward.
Yes, Celeste, help us keep that idea. We'll have some time for reflection. We've got this information obviously recorded, but I think you're right. I think identifying that as a potential action, kind of in that, I don't know if it's interagency work, interagency coordination, or technical assistance, or whatever the getting the information out in dynamic and intentional ways that we have the benefit of hearing. Yeah, appreciate that. I don't know if staff, if you have any comments or questions about that final point of Celeste, but if not, anybody else want to comment on that?
I just wanted to say that I'd be happy to come back and do this again or serve in whatever capacity you need me to, Celeste. So the door is open.
Thank you, Grace. All right, well, we've come to the end of day one. You made it. Thanks, everybody. I think I'm turning it over to Celeste to actually close us out. I don't know if there are any other guests or public. Obviously, we had some engagement from Elizabeth, which was appreciated. And if there are other guests, now would be the time. to identify, but Lindsay, I don't think there are any, so it's probably time to turn it over to Celeste to take us home.
If Karen had any closing reflection.
Yeah, okay. Was it Karen? Yeah, so yeah, Karen. It's Karen's job. Oh, and Jaime has that story we could have. Sorry.
Okay, I am not going to speak for very long because I would definitely want to get to Jaime's story. I want to thank everybody for being present and being here today. Really a rich presentations. It's given me a lot to think about and reflect on. And being a lawyer, I'll probably spend most of the evening trying to figure out what the word assessment means. Thank you, Molly, for that. Appreciate it. But I like where we're headed, thinking about how we can incorporate this thinking as we're doing the strategic plan. And I hope that as you reflect tonight, you can jot down some notes. We will have a reflection period tomorrow morning for just a little bit. We will have more content, and then we will reflect some more. So please jot down any ideas that you may have. And now I'm going to turn it over to Jaime for his wonderful story.
All right, thanks for giving me a couple minutes here. One data point I want you to remember: 1 out of 10 kids in Oregon is part of a mixed status immigration family. That's according to the Oregon Center for Public Policy. So this is the story of Jose Magaña. It's called "The Will of a Dreamer in His Community." Te escucho, hermano. I hear you, brother. I can hear you louder than any words can ever express. It was a moment I'll never forget, the day I met Jose Magaña, a dreamer. His sister connected us after hearing my immigrant story. She thought that perhaps I could lend a hand as he was struggling to find the money to finish his last term at Western Oregon University. Meet me at a downtown Salem coffee shop, I said to Jose. As I started to get ready to take off from a long meeting at WU, he texted me back, I'm here. There's a band setting up for some performance, so it might not be the best place to meet. I was like, what? A band? I didn't want him to spend on another cup of coffee, so I told him to hang on. I got there, and there was the band, still setting up. I rushed over immediately where he was sitting. We started talking. Éramos paisanos. We were compatriots. He began to share his story. He was a 30-year-old DACA, going to school full-time, working to help his familia pay the rent, all while trying to finish his last term, which he had no money for. I took a deep breath. He kept going, and then the band started to play. I could hear his voice. I couldn't hear his voice anymore. It was too loud. So I looked deep into his eyes. The noise began to disappear. I saw me. I saw us. The little boy crying out for help when he could only capture a small part of what the teacher was saying in English. The boy who hid behind a dumpster in hopes that the police would not find his family and deport them. El pescador, the picker, in pain, who had one more bucket left in him. I saw ganas, determination, the will of a dreamer in his community. I saw and felt the human will we all have to survive and be free. Te escucho, hermano. I hear you, brother. We hear you. Gracias.
And we will end with that. See you tomorrow.
Thank you, Jaime. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you
so much. Thank you for this. Bye-bye.